In 1987, a horrifying piece of news shook the entire Soviet Union. In Kyiv, an entire family of serial killers was put on trial for mercilessly poisoning people for years with the lethal substance thallium. The defendants were Maria and Anton Maslenko, along with their daughters, Tamara Ivanyutina and Nina Matsebra. The most victims were attributed to 45-year-old Ivanyutina. She poisoned 20 people, including small children, and became the last woman in the USSR to be sentenced to death and executed at the end of 1987. Ivanyutina's motives were revenge and personal gain. She also claimed she didn't want to breed poverty by tolerating other people's children. Psychiatrists declared her fully sane. They highlighted three main traits of her personality: an extremely inflated self-esteem, hypersensitivity, and vengefulness, characteristics typically seen in sociopaths, paranoiacs, and narcissists. Tamara Antonovna was born into a large Kyiv family as the fourth of 6 children. By all accounts, it was a strange household, fixated on wealth and luxury. The father never hesitated to slip poison to anyone who rubbed him the wrong way. Tamara's mother had her own life philosophy: don't bother writing complaints. Instead, befriend everyone and offer them hospitality. But if they're especially troublesome, slip some poison into their food. The elderly Maslenko couple went so far as to fatally poison a neighbor in their communal apartment building because he played his TV too loudly at night. They also poisoned a relative who commented on their dirty floors. The Maslenkos would add rat poison to the pilaf and pancakes they served guests. They would even inject poison into oranges and gingerbread as a twisted form of revenge. As Tamara grew older, she married a man who held one of the most sought-after jobs of that era, a long-haul truck driver. In the Soviet Union, long-haul trucking was considered prestigious and paid well. Her husband didn't drink, worked hard, and earned a decent salary. A happy family, seemingly everything a Soviet woman could want. But Tamara wanted money and an apartment right away, so she began poisoning her husband. She did it slowly, gradually increasing the dose. One day, while on the road, he felt unwell, complaining to his partner about severe headaches, nausea, and numbness in his limbs. Soon his hair began to fall out, and each day his condition worsened. Shortly after returning from that trip, he died of a heart attack. Tamara's mourning was brief. She soon married Oleg Ivanyutin and took his last name. When she saw the Ivanyutin family's land and house, she made a decision. Get rid of the old folks, turn the land into a pig farm, sell the pigs for meat and fat, and get rich, rich, rich. One day, Tamara and her mother-in-law prepared a meal and set the table. They ate, and by evening, Oleg's father fell gravely ill. The next morning, Oleg's mother called to say her husband's legs had gone numb and his heart was hurting. Oleg told her to call an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors examined the old man and determined he was experiencing a flare-up of polyarthritis. They prescribed medication and sent him home. Tamara suddenly seemed very concerned about her father-in-law's health and told Oleg they should go help his parents. Toma held a hot water bottle to his feet and spoon-fed him soup. Oleg praised her as the most caring daughter-in-law imaginable. Meanwhile, she was slipping another dose of poison into his soup. He died that very night. But the most startling event was yet to come. At the father's funeral, Oleg's mother began complaining of severe heart pain. Oleg asked Tamara to fetch some medication from the house. She returned with a shot glass of valocordon and a glass of water. The moment Oleg's mother drank it, she staggered. a white film appeared on her lips, and she began vomiting. Panic erupted among the mourners. The widow cried out that she had been poisoned. One woman swore she saw Tamara pull a tiny vial from her sweater pocket and add some liquid to the medicine. The men demanded the police be called. Someone suggested sending the contents of the glass in for analysis. At that, Tamara threw the shot glass and the water glass to the ground. Oleg shielded his wife from the angry crowd and tried to comfort his mother. Soon, she developed the same symptoms her husband had experienced: pain in her arms and legs, numbness in her feet, and difficulty speaking. By evening, an ambulance took her to the hospital. 2 days later, she died there. With both parents out of the way, Toma was free to pursue her pig farm plan. But where to get feed? The answer, she decided, was at school. Tamara got a job as a dishwasher at school number 16 in Kyiv's Minsky district. In March 1987, 3 sixth graders and 11 school employees were rushed to the hospital by ambulance with what was initially diagnosed as the flu. They all shared the same symptoms: weakness, nausea, leg pain, and hair loss. Despite aggressive treatment, 2 children and 2 adults died almost immediately, and the rest went into intensive care. In those days, for sudden deaths in a row was considered a major emergency, and the prosecutor's office became involved. Doctors from the hospital were summoned to an urgent meeting at the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine. Some theorized it might be an unknown form of the flu, which would explain why standard treatments weren't helping. Others suspected a strong toxic substance had been introduced through the food or water. Initially, the poisoning theory wasn't taken seriously. But after investigators interviewed the survivors, they discovered everyone had eaten in the school cafeteria. The only remnants of the meal were chicken soup and chicken liver, and interestingly, those who ate earlier that day weren't affected. The first to die by Tamara's hand was the school nurse, Kukurenko, who had scolded Ivanyutina for violating hygiene rules. It's worth noting that Tamara didn't hesitate to pick fights with both students and teachers. She constantly hovered near the stove, looking into pots and pans. Because the pay was low, the school couldn't easily find another dishwasher, so they kept Ivanyutina on. After Kukurenko was hospitalized, she complained of numbness and cold in her legs. Doctors diagnosed her with heart failure. Not long before, she had been perfectly healthy and lively. 6 months earlier, 2 students and 2 teachers had ended up in the hospital with the same symptoms. One teacher later told investigators he'd lost his hair in a strangely rapid manner. All these incidents suggested the illnesses were no coincidence. Investigators decided to exhume Kukurenko's remains, and that's when they found traces of thallium in her body. Naturally, no one had suspected someone might be deliberately using a lethal poison to kill. An inquiry to the local health and safety authorities showed no insect or rodent extermination had been carried out in the cafeteria. Inspectors examined every corner of the school, the food supplies, the cookware, and storage containers, even leftover buckwheat. All tests came back negative. However, investigators did notice Ivanyutina's odd behavior, especially her attempts to stop them from inspecting her personal locker. Next, they examined the personnel files of all cafeteria workers. That's when they discovered Ivanyutina's work record was fake. She had a prior conviction for illegal trading and wasn't allowed to work in children's institutions at all. This gave investigators a reason to look deeper into her background. They soon uncovered the deaths of her first husband and her second husband's parents. Each had complained of nausea and numbness in their limbs. Even Oleg Ivanyutin had long been suffering from general weakness, joint pain, and hair loss, but doctors never arrived at a diagnosis. Tamara was now the prime suspect. During a search of the Ivanyutins' home, the vital evidence turned up at the very last moment. After they'd searched everything else, investigator Kalichikova approached a small cupboard by the window and asked Tamara to open it. With a contemptuous look, Ivanyutina hesitated. "It's just a sewing machine I got for my mother-in-law. You really want to check that? Open it. Or give me the key, and I'll do it," Kalichikova replied. Ivanyutina threw the keys on the floor and practically hissed, "Do it yourself." Kalichikova examined the sewing machine and found a hidden bottle underneath it, supposedly containing oil. It was seized and sent to the lab. Testing showed it was actually Clarici solution, an aqueous thallium compound used in geology for sorting minerals by density. Investigators immediately looked into all organizations under the Ukrainian Ministry of Geology and quickly found the supplier, a lab technician at a geological survey who'd been regularly giving the Maslenko family thallium, supposedly to kill rats. Over time, they received about 500 milligrams of poison. Tamara's sister, Nina Matsebra, also followed suit, poisoning her own husband. Nina had married a much older man, and once he officially registered her at his apartment, he had unknowingly signed his own death warrant. Just a week after the wedding, he was hospitalized with weakness and pain in his legs. His death was dismissed as old age. The searches of Maria and Anton Maslenko's home turned up no poison, but they effectively gave themselves away. With Tamara already in custody, her mother, Maria Maslenko, baked pancakes and took them to a neighbor who had a large disability pension, something that made the Maslenkos seethe with envy. The neighbor, aware that Maria's daughter was under suspicion for poisoning, refused to eat the pancakes. Instead, she fed one to her cat. By evening, it was in convulsions, and 3 hours later it died. The neighbor reported it to the police, and the Maslenko couple was arrested. Just like Tamara, they enthusiastically detailed whom they had poisoned, when, how, and why. Initially, Tamara made a full confession, describing her crimes in depth. She admitted to poisoning 2 sixth graders, simply because they refused to rearrange tables and chairs. "I wanted to teach them a lesson," she said. She also revealed she tested the poison on neighbors' chickens and cats first, experimenting with doses to see how much would make someone mildly ill versus how much would kill. She showed no concern for how terribly her victims suffered. "There's no room for mistakes in a job like this," she boasted. Later, she claimed her confession had been coerced and refused to provide further testimony. But by then, investigators already had the full picture. In the fall of 1986, Tamara fatally poisoned the school's party organizer because she prevented Tamara from stealing food from the cafeteria. Then Tamara slipped thallium to 2 students, a 1st grader and a 5th grader, after they had the nerve to ask if there were any leftover meat patties. Luckily, both kids survived, but poisoning of that severity leaves lasting damage. After Nurse Kukurenko's death, the cafeteria manager, Noga, began to suspect foul play and started locking the storeroom at night to keep Tamara away from the supplies. Furious, the psychopath told him he'd go the same way as Kukurenko. Ivanyutina used a syringe to inject an orange with thallium solution and offered it to Noga. Fortunately, he never ate it. On that grim day in March when the children were poisoned, the chicken liver laced with thallium was actually intended for him. But due to a staff meeting, some teachers and other employees showed up late for lunch. Witnesses later recalled how Tamara watched them eat the tainted food with a satisfied smile on her face. Altogether, investigators confirmed 40 poisonings committed by the family, 13 of them fatal. Amazingly, a psychiatric evaluation determined that all the family members were mentally competent. Tamara was responsible for the most poisonings, 20 in total, 9 of them deadly. The trial of these serial killers lasted for several months. In his testimony, Tamara's husband, Oleg, said she would bring home more and more leftovers from the school, pleased that the kids weren't finishing their meals. The teachers became her targets because they tried to make the students clean their plates, a direct threat to the extra slop Tamara wanted for her pigs. In her mind, causing food-related panic at the school would make people distrust cafeteria meals and increase the amount of uneaten food. Tamara Ivanyutina was ultimately sentenced to the highest penalty, death, along with confiscation of her property. Her father, mother, and sister received prison terms of 13, 10, and 15 years, respectively, and were ordered to compensate the victims for their medical expenses. When given the chance for a final statement, Tamara refused to admit guilt or ask the victims' families for forgiveness. "I wasn't raised that way," she said loftily. She was executed at Kyiv's Lukyanivska pretrial detention center in late 1987, becoming the third and last woman in the USSR to receive an official death sentence. Her parents died in prison, while her sister, Nina Matsebra, served part of her term and was released in post-Soviet Ukraine. Unfortunately, what happened to her after that remains unknown. That's all for now. If you found this video interesting, please give us a like and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.